I'm really happy to speak with Gavin Knox-Grant this morning. Gavin's actually from South Africa, our first international speaker, which is absolutely fantastic for the channel. Gavin heads up an agency in South Africa called Carbon Media, and one of his specialities is corporate identity, something I pretty much shied away from in my career because I've had a fear of not getting a return on my investment, or I won't like it, and perhaps the initial cost of doing so. I think Gavin, having a little pre-chat with him, is going to completely put my fears to bed and make me make this investment when we have some money to do so. But Gavin, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Oh no, it's absolutely fascinating. Looking forward to chatting with you. Can we just start?
Absolutely.
Because corporate identity encompasses just so much. It's not just a logo. It's everything about your business, from the packaging, the way you present yourself, the language you use, the colors, everything. Perhaps you could just give a little synopsis of how you see corporate identity.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for me, one of the easiest analogies to use to explain this, and it's something that everyone can understand, is you've got to think about the entire world of branding and design and identity and all of that. The metaphor of a human, of a person, can be used. The logo would be your face. Then the identity becomes a number of things. It becomes, can you recognize, excuse me, the company or the person in this case, if you can't see their face? So what about the mannerisms? What about what they're wearing? You know, these kinds of things become interesting. So absolutely, typography, the font choice is a critical thing. And I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges with people that sort of are new in design, is working out the correct typefaces and sticking to them. Color. There are many brands that own a specific color. You know, Vodafone, it's red and white and that's it. They can't deviate from that. So if you start seeing a red comma, even if it isn't the logo itself, but it's a red comma that looks similar against white, it's going to link that up because they've spent so much money building that up. So imagery, you know, I mean, as a photographer, you know, you would know this. The style of photography, there are brands that only use black and white photography. The treatment, I mean, if I think of BMW as a good example of a visual language of this, not so much these days, but certainly, you know, in the early 2000s, you could take the logo away from a print ad and get it feels like BMW because of the way the car was shot, the slightly desaturated, the open space. Porsche is another great example of that. So yeah, that's certainly, it needs to be able to be recognized easily with or without the logo, essentially. I mean, it's harder to do, but if you take the logo away and swap it out, it should not exactly work. If you put another logo with your brand and it works, your visual identity isn't really tight enough. Yeah. Then of course the logo represents the entire feeling. Yeah, that's how I'd put it.
No, excellent. And also, Gavin, I think the color plays a vital role as well. I may be wrong, but I remember that Google slightly changed its shade of blue in a test, and it got something like 4% more interactions.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it may be saying it's in my med that it's pub talk. I don't know. After a few pints, I don't know. I should research that. But I'm sure they did an experiment in just how it. Because I was speaking with I'm sure it was actually someone I was working with on a website, and they were talking about the importance of the color.
When you find that info, please send that to me. That's fascinating. It does feel like it's gone slightly lighter over the years, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, certainly interesting to see. And when you go to a client who's had no corporate identity as such, they've done it all in-house, or they've started up, they've done it on Canva. They've got all their assets for free. What's the actual process that you take to onboard them and to actually create an identity for them?
Okay, so, and this is really where one begins to alleviate your fears. And it's where, many designers without proper training and experience have sort of painted a bad reputation in the industry. All the creative, particularly, identity work, has to line up with the business strategy first. Because otherwise, if you look at the this is a great example, Orange Telecom. When I do talks and lectures on this kind of thing, I love to use this as an example, because I say to people, I put up the Orange Telecom logo on a screen. And it's, as we know, it's an orange square with bold Helvetica at the bottom with lowercase o, just says orange. And I say to people, what did this cost? And I mean, we're talking in the regions of millions of pounds, millions. And then I say, how long did it take? And they go, firstly, they would say, well, it cost £100 to make, that sort of thing. How long did it take? I mean, I could do it in less than my kid could do it in a minute on PowerPoint. So then becomes the key question. How do you know it's got to be an orange square with bold Helvetica at the bottom with a lowercase o? Because that's where the investment sits. And that is where you've really got to do the work. So you first have to sit down with the company and do full workshops. We generally start with a discovery 3-hour workshop and get a full landscape, the industry, the competitors, how do they differentiate? How are they realistically competing? If they're starting out, naturally, how do they plan on doing that? And then you've got to evaluate that, because so much of the time, people come for a branding or marketing or design solution to a perceived problem. And the problem is sometimes a business problem, not a brand or design problem. So from my perspective, as a responsible brand communication designer, it's really important to kick back a bit, challenge the business assumptions, and ensure that there is realistic, substantial reasons and research. And naturally, that's easier with a business that's got traction, and it can prove that this is our positioning, this is our service or product offering, and it differentiates like this. Right. Now, if you think of the entire reason one has a brand, and this is, again, something people don't think about. If you have no competition, you do not need a brand, as long as it's a product that people need. So if you think about the Soviet Union, in the 80s, you go in and buy let's say a bar of soap. It's government issue soap, and it says soap. There's no, it's not like here's Gavin's soap with essence of elderflower, and there's David's soap that, and so you have to create a differentiator of things that are often pretty the same. I mean, cars are a wonderful example of this. How do you really realistically tell the intrinsic value between, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Volvo? Take the logos, take everything away. Can anyone really say what the cost of the bolts are, what the real differences in quality? They're the same thing, essentially. So you've got to go and say, well, Volvo's now taken ownership of safety. BMW's got to take ownership of sheer driving pleasure and excitement, and so on. You've got to know that stuff first. Because then, let's say we're now going to develop an identity for Audi as an example. You then say, well, that identity came from the 4 founders, which is fine. And value, when an identity is created, this essentially isn't value in it. The value has to be built. You've got to put meaning into the mark. So there's a way that you can then say, well, the 4 rings together, what do we use with the visual language to communicate technology, which is essentially what they own. And how do you, we speak a lot about video, and Audi uses video extensively to communicate technology. So these are the kinds of things. And when it comes to a brand identity, people get very obsessed about trying to be literal and trying to say everything, an entire story in the logo. They're a plumber, so they want a drop of water where there's got to be a tap in the logo. It has nothing to do with that. The function of the logo is not to say what you do at all. It's to create a feeling of why I should trust you. It's an entry point into the brand. There are obviously practical rules like simplicity, can it reduce well, but it's got to fit into the category. So if you do a photography identity, if I look at it immediately, and if it looks like you're an investment banker, it doesn't feel right. It's got to feel like it's in the category. And then, is it memorable? And does it give me the feeling that ties up with the business strategy and then the brand strategy? That's how you've got to approach this. And then this could go on. You then go to competitors and you say, well, what have they done? You look at the entire industry and you analyze what colors are being used in the category. What typography is being used? Is it sans serif? Is it serif? How do we then stay in category but still communicate our differentiator? And it really comes down to, you've got to use your gut feeling as the barometer here. And that's essentially how it gets developed. And that really requires experience to get that right, which is why it costs so much and takes so long with big brand agencies. Research. Because opinions, this is another thing, and it plugs into whether you're happy or not. This is one of the most important things to, I guess, accept, is that we aren't the target market. If you aren't the target market, as a designer, my opinion isn't relevant. As the client, their opinion isn't relevant. The target market's opinion is relevant. It's not about whether we like it or not. It's about whether it's going to work. Having said that, if we don't like it, based on the argument and the criteria that have been built to evaluate the success of the logo, then it needs to be looked at, because instinctively there's probably something wrong. But a lot of the time it's just ego. I mean, I had a client once, he loved KTM, that was his brand, and he wanted his logo to look like KTM. I didn't take on the job because, that's just, you're not, yeah. So that's sort of, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting actually, about not doing what you will relate to you. And I think a prime example of that would be advertising on television in between daytime shows and evening dramas. Completely different demographic watching, maybe completely different adverts, and the style of adverts and the investment made into the adverts completely different. That exemplifies your points, entirely.
Yeah.
When you come to, as a growing business, if someone was coming to your agency, would they be able to work in a modular basis, by that, having the logo done initially, then perhaps looking at going for the fonts, then building a brand identity, so branding pack, etc. Can it work in that way, or does it all have to be done as one big package?
You can't really do that, because you've got a logo. Now what? You can't use it, because the logo goes onto something, and there are other elements that are then required. I mean, even if you're using a business card, not that many people use them anymore, but traditionally, what font are you going to use? There's got to be a design. Are you going to bring in color? It can get really advanced. I mean, what paper are you going to use? It's not a responsible approach, because as you're going, if things change, any sort of equity that you may have built up, if you've got to adjust that, it affects your consistency. And the only way to build a brand is through it's the only way to build trust is through consistency.
Yeah.
So you can't really do that. I mean, having said that, there are ways to do things that don't cost a fortune. It again just depends on the category. And this is another really important thing. There are industries that don't require expensive logos. Again, if I use a plumbing, if those sorts of industries as an example, where does the perception management matter the most? It matters more in how you retain business. It matters more in whether in the service and whether they arrive and whether you get is the van kind of clean? Do they create a perception of the logo's just got to be clean and it's got to, communicate. I mean, they're obviously brands that then go and they can create a bit of fun and they can, but it's almost more in that instance about the name that's memorable. I mean, when do you come across a plumber's identity? Maybe in a van that you see driving past. Most of the time it's referrals.
Yeah.
So why would you invest millions in an identity? It makes no sense. However, if you're embroidering a logo on Roger Federer's t-shirt, you've got to, that's you're going to have a few zeros there, Yeah. So it really does depend.
That's what comes through as well, because it does come down to that whole identity into how you present yourself as a brand, doesn't it? In terms of getting staff uniforms, if they're going to be, customer facing. A particular example that I'm aware of, and I think it's the Dorchester. They probably all do it now, but I remember the first time, probably 15 years ago, the Dorchester, all their front-facing staff were dressed in Armani or something like that. And,
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Brilliant. What a great investment in success, what you're entering into, isn't it?
I mean, what you're talking about now is very much what we were talking about with the entire visual identity system. So you could almost have plumbers that the logo is Helvetica and it's red, and then all their vans are red, all the uniforms are red, all their tools are red. Like that, that's amazing. They're the red guys. Like, you don't even need to remember the name. It's just, you'll see them, they're red, and you can even call red plumbing. I mean, that's a huge differentiator. So that stuff's important. And again, as you say, it completely depends on the industry and the category. There are different rules, and you've got to be, in order to get the return on the investment, that's the stuff you've really got to know and find out. Yeah.
I know that as an agency, you've worked with some global companies. Just putting those aside for one moment, when you've worked with some smaller companies who perhaps our listeners might be directors of, can you give any sort of real life examples of how your branding has actually really helped their business go forward and achieve their goals?
Absolutely. I mean, one that immediately comes to mind is an IT company that's fairly small, maybe a staff complement of 30 people, and it's in the security industry. In South Africa, private security, armed response sort of companies is a huge business, and they write the software that goes to the control centers that manages the fleet and manages armed guards, and it's the real-time sort of stuff. Now, as a business, they started out with a very successful product that worked well, and then of course they wanted to grow. So instead of designing a 10-bedroom house, they started with a 1-bedroom house, and then rooms just got built on. And what happens then is, when you come into the house, it doesn't make sense that there's a bedroom here and the kitchen behind the bathroom, and that sort of thing. So the product offering was quite confusing, but that leads into brand confusion and design confusion. So first of all, we had to sort out the product offering. We really had to make sense of groups of products and what needs they're addressing. Then it becomes about, do I understand what this thing does? completely, and how it differentiates from the competitors and from the rest of the company. And how do we then design that? So it still fits into the company, it still fits into the product, but their users, I mean, they literally phoned them and said, you've made it so much easier for me to choose, that the sales facilitation process, moving from sort of interest to desire to purchase facilitation, becomes so much more streamlined, because you get them to the point of wanting it sooner, because they're not going, does this, I'm not sure which one, so much of the time, and medical aids and insurance are notorious for this. And it's created an entire broker industry, because who can choose those products? They've got like 30 products for you to choose. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And you end up with this you end up with this paradox of choice. You're stuck, and a paralysis of choice, really. So a lot of the time for companies in that space, in this instance, the design of the products, having solved a business confusion issue, radically affected the return, because it made it so much easier to choose. There are other cases, and this is maybe slightly a bit more different for even smaller businesses. I had a company that was a breakaway. There were guys from a larger company chain, it would be the equivalent of maybe a Costa, but they were three managers maybe of some of the stores that got together, and they wanted to start their own coffee shop here. But they had a budget of like £1,000. And I said to them, you know what? I mean, do you get Ferrero Rocher in the UK?
Chocolate.
Okay, so I said to them, guys, just make sure that the place is clean. Make sure your tables are clean. With every cup of coffee, give them a Ferrero Rocher and run that for a while, because they wanted to do flyers, and and it's just a complete waste. There are better ways, and it's about starting with perception, and is the best way in the beginning to suddenly do a complete overhaul. You got to kind of get traction first, and it's, again, depends on the category. But they had chosen their name, and they just wanted to, it wasn't even an identity job, it was literally a launch, kind of a communication job, and start getting regulars. Because with a thing like a coffee shop, it then becomes social, it becomes referral, it becomes, so rather just get people there and start taking pictures and create a, what's going to get people there? Not flyers and windscreen of cars, I can guarantee it. We get a free Ferrero Rocher, let's go, and there's another coffee shop on the other side, let's rather go here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was working for a client, and I was based there actually, and I did the photography for their social media, which was it was flat lays. It was just immensely boring. And we could have gone out to the suppliers and, done interviews. It'd been so much better. But yeah, and I always wondered why they actually employed the social media person from an outside sort of agency. And actually being far better for them, because they're a food wholesaler, sort of artisan food. Look, you're business to business. With every order that goes out, send them a free pack of your own brand sausages.
Of course.
It's gonna be a far better return on your investment than,
Absolutely.
So they're selling to retailers, get them in the retailers, new products, have this. But it falls on deaf ears.
And one of the biggest challenges, again, just on that with social media, one of the biggest challenges we face at the moment in this industry is that everyone and their daughter thinks they're a social media expert.
Oh, don't get me started.
And because as a business owner, you don't necessarily know how to evaluate the quality of a supplier. That they're going to say, oh well, we'll post on these platforms and once a day, and it's so just hit and miss, and that's sort of fine if you if you're using it just to say, well, we're on social media. But social media can be such a powerful thing if you just sit back first and you say, actually, with our business, we should only be on LinkedIn or on Instagram. So we need someone that understands Instagram, and rather find out things first. Is your market on Instagram? When are they on Instagram? What do they want to see on Instagram? What pain, excuse me, pain point are you communicating that you solve on Instagram? And instead of someone that just says, don't worry, we'll do it all for you. It's a massive issue.
100%. You see it all the time, and especially in perhaps more established firms who don't really understand. They know I can put a picture on Instagram or do a tweet, but actually they don't understand how to do it, the mechanics of it and the technical aspects of when they should be doing it, what they should be doing. And they invariably employ someone, you know, straight out of college or in their sort of early to mid 20s who's got a little bit of knowledge because it's perhaps a native thing to them. But actually they don't really know. They just think the pretty picture is going to make all the difference and business can come flooding in. But that's far from the case. It's very, very hard to succeed in social media.
And it's because, and it's again, like all of these things with branding and design, it's often a grudge purchase. So people will come and say, well, I need a logo, not I want a logo. Because they don't understand necessarily how the return of investment works, because how do you really accurately measure that? And what you can't measure, it's hard to manage. So with social media, it's the same thing. They say, well, we need social. We've got to just have stuff up there because everyone's on social media. That's not really a good enough reason to go there. Why do you really want to go there? Is it awareness? Are you trying to, you know, that's where it's got to start. And because of that, it literally just becomes a price war. Who can I get? And it's at the time, who can I get that's going to post however many times we want, and who's going to charge the least? Cool. My neighbor's daughter does it. Let's give her some work, and she can do it in between her exams. Because there's no value. There's no understanding of measurable investment. So when a company, you know, comes and charges, you know, whatever it may be, £10,000 a month, or it sounds crazy because they don't understand, especially because it can take 6 months to get traction. So now it's like, it's hard. And of course it's hard. And I also do think, you know, small businesses, especially in this climate, never mind, you know, the pandemic, which has made it even harder because it's forced all businesses to go online. The competition is insane. And so you've got to be incredibly careful with where you spend money. And it becomes harder. You know, this is why consultants, you know, buying even just half an hour of advice can save you a fortune. Even if you have to wait 6 months and get the revenue to then action it. Because with the wrong advice, you're not just losing money, you can damage your brand by just making mistakes and building the wrong perception, you know.
You might be able to answer a question that has been in my mind for a few months now. Last year, I had a client, a major client. They manufacture, you know, crisps, and we're doing some Christmas shots actually for them. And I got all the brand guidelines, you know, pages of stuff and inspirational mood boards, etc. But what I did not understand is absolutely adamant in no pictures whatsoever were to show any crisps. We could have a packet that was open, but nothing of the actual product. Still don't understand why that would be. Can you offer any insight?
That's really interesting. Look, I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, that's really difficult to answer.
It's bewildering. It's bewildering, right?
Without understanding the business and the brand and what they're trying to achieve, it's quite hard to understand. Off the top of my head, there could be 2 reasons. Number one, maybe they didn't like what the chips looked like.
That crisp, they look the same as every other. It's a premium brand, but it looks, you know, they look the same.
The other thing would be maybe they wanted to make the packaging the hero, and because they all look the same, then why do you need to see them? So put the focus, but it does seem strange to me. Food marketing, and again, which is why you would know why food photography is so incredibly important and specific, is I actually want to taste it when I see it.
Yeah. Well,
and
exactly.
so yeah, I can't. I'd have to.
And
it would
this
be
is a
really
context
interesting
to have in the pub, and we've got the whole scene, the fireplace, and we've got some beer and some wine, everything else, and other food and its packaging on the table as well. And it's a party. Let's have some crisps. So yeah, I thought that was, but also the other thing was this is a big brand owned by a global company, you know, multi-billion pound company.
right.
And they said, oh, David, this is in lockdown. Well, we need these pictures. We want some on, on a big kitchen island, a nice kitchen. We want some by a lovely roaring fire. I said, where exactly is where am I going to magic these up from? Where do you think they suddenly appear from? And you've got, proper brand guidelines, you know. It's like, you haven't thought about where you're actually going to do this shoot. You need a location house. You've got a creative team. One of your creatives needs to be there, or you need a stylist there. And I said, look, you're a big grown-up company. What is this? You know, I think they're a bit taken aback.
Right, but I love
it. But they've got all the branding, and then they don't. Yeah, they've invested in the branding, so they've got to do that, and probably great branding. And they don't really they expect magic.
But it's wonderful that you kick back. You know, it's wonderful that you challenge that. You know, and a lot of people don't have the confidence to do that, and that's part of the problem. So yeah, and a lot of it I've worked, as you say. I mean, there've been some big multinationals, and some of the choices I've just thought, it just makes no sense.
I think it's to justify their own existence a lot of the time in the role that they've got. Right. There's no reason for it at all.
And sometimes I've found that they will put juniors on something that isn't really that important. So they say, well, this team needs experience, so let's just put these people on it and see what happens. Another massive problem, and I'm not saying this necessarily applied in this case, but a huge problem with those companies is there's no risk, because at some point along the line, the decision has to be justified to the board, money-wise. So the person making those decisions is literally just worried about their job, not really about the success or the return on investment. And that can cause huge problems sometimes, because it's literally, you're just wasting money so much of the time. Yeah. You know, and they could have sold this concept of how, and the way that they sold the concept. No, the market's going to love this, and the bag is going to sell. And because of the way they sold it, somebody goes, okay, well, I've got a meeting now. Just let's go with it and see what happens. Yeah, there's strange things. There's strange things that can sometimes happen at that level. Yeah.
So Gavin, just sort of wrapping up, what advice could you give a small business owner on how to sort of proceed on their branding if they haven't quite got the budget yet to go to an agency such as yourself?
Right. You know, David, I think the very first thing is to educate oneself. Find out about this world instead of just accepting things that clever salespeople will tell you. Go and have a research, look at what logos cost, and you'll see some multinational logos cost £1 million. Instead of, laughing and thinking it's ridiculous, find out why. There's that great quote from Jeff Bezos, who says that a brand is the most important investment a company can make. Why would that be? So instead of seeing it as a grudge purchase, look at it as an investment. Now, I say that because in my experience, a lot of small business owners are nervous because money is tight. You've obviously be careful. You've got to be careful about where you invest the money, and because you can't measure the return, it's very scary. So the trick is that if you know your stuff, you can evaluate an advisor. That's not to say you need to go and get a qualification in branding and design. It just means that you need to be a little bit more informed, so that when you get a company and you're evaluating a company, ask them questions about why they made that decision and what has that done. And with a little bit of research, a little bit of education, you'll either know whether they're on the level or not. And then once you've got people that you can trust, rather just get advice first before you start going down the road. Because once you start creating any kind of identity, you don't want to have to redo that. Building a brand takes time, and over time, the funds add up. So make the decisions. It's exactly the same as building a house. You know, find out if you can build on this rocky slope first, and choose an architect that knows how to do that and can recommend the best way of doing that, instead of spending £1 million and suddenly you find out that actually this thing that we intended can't happen. And now I mean, whether that's the best example or not, it illustrates the point.
Yeah.
That really would be my advice.
Oh, that's brilliant. Gavin, thank you very, very much. It's been really, really informative talking to you. I know that sort of branding and corporate identity is something that I've certainly got to address. Perhaps once you've got some income coming in and some investment. And I'm sure I'll be knocking on your door for some help on that. So thank you very much.
Always available, Dave. And thank you. This is wonderful. I love talking about this stuff, and I love just trying to improve businesses through let's say responsible brand investment.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Gavin.
Have a great day. Bye, David. Bye.